I'm Karina Kirchhoff, and welcome back to the Frisco ISD podcast. Today I'm happy to chat with Frisco ISD's Chief Student Services Officer, Erin Miller, about the Student Code of Conduct. You'll hear about the recent updates to the Student Code of Conduct and how it impacts our district on a greater scale. Oh, and be sure to stay tuned after the episode for the latest news updates from around the district. Erin, before we do a deep dive regarding the Student Code of Conduct, we should probably talk about how this falls within the purview of student services.
Okay, sure, Karina. So in addition to guidance and counseling, the whole child, fine arts, 504, and student organizations, student services is the department that's responsible for student behavior. That entails ensuring we have proactive strategies such as building relationships and school-wide positive behavior interventions. But it's also about being responsive when students don't exhibit the appropriate behavior. And the Student Code of Conduct guides us in those responses.
Now, I understand that the Student Code of Conduct is required to be approved by the Board of Trustees each year. This is regulated and it's required by the Texas Education Code. So how is the FISD Student Code of Conduct actually developed?
If you look at the Texas Education Code, Chapter 37 outlines what school districts must develop and list in their Student Code of Conduct. So each year, we review and revise our Student Code of Conduct based on any legislative changes or any advice that we get from some of the groups out there, such as TASB, and we make any necessary and appropriate changes, and then we have to have that approved by the school board each year.
Okay, so speaking of things that kind of come at us, we have some new things in the Student Code of Conduct this year. So what changes do we have?
Yeah, so there are three big ones. The first one actually came out of the legislative session, and so this is one that's state law now. Students who have e-cigarettes on them, so any portion of an e-cigarette, that's an automatic mandatory placement to the alternative school in the district. So that's something that's mandatory for us to take into consideration. Another one, this is actually discretionary. We made this as a school district decision, that if a student is fighting on campus, that we may make a discretionary placement at the DAEP. So that's the alternative school. So it was a local decision that if students get in a fight more than once, that we can place them at the alternative school so they can see that the district takes mutual combat and fighting very seriously. There was another one where the district is going to exercise recommending a discretionary placement for possessing, using, giving, selling, or being under the influence of any product containing hemp, CBD, or THC. And that includes Delta-8 or any products that basically are used to become intoxicated or high. That's not something that's law that we would have to place at the alternative placement for that, but we see that as a discretionary placement.
Okay, you've mentioned e-cigarettes or vaping, fighting, and possessing, using, giving, CBD, THC, hemp, Delta-8, and all of those. You also mentioned discretionary placements. Exactly what is the difference between discretionary and mandatory?
That's also defined by Chapter 37 of the Texas Education Code. They tell us what placements in an alternative setting are either mandatory or discretionary, and also if it would be a district placement here at our Student Opportunity Center, or if it would be an expulsion that would go to Collin County and McKinney ISD. So it's important to remember that with mandatory or discretionary placements, there are factors that we have to look at, but they're definitely defined in Texas Education Code.
So it's kind of out of our hands, basically.
Yeah, in some ways it is.
And how does the district ensure that we're consistent with discipline from campus to campus despite there being nuances?
So when our district was smaller, the campuses had a lot more autonomy in assigning discipline to students. But then as we grew, we brought the campuses together and we created a behavior matrix that would help us to norm how discipline's assigned. We use it as a guide. So when infractions occur to the Student Code of Conduct, the assistant principals will take a look at this behavior matrix to kind of get an idea of how they should assign the discipline. And what Student Services does is we conduct scenario-based training with our assistant principals so we can talk through these discipline situations and really norm our responses to them.
So if a parent wants to find out, like they heard about another student, they want to know if that child was disciplined, would they be able to find out about that child?
They can't. FERPA, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, it protects student privacy. So because of this, a parent is not able to find out about another student's discipline, only their own students.
What do you think students and families may not realize about student discipline?
I think that unless you're really ingrained in it, like we are, You don't realize that there are many factors that have to be considered when assigning discipline. It'd be easy if A plus B always equals C, but it doesn't when it comes to student discipline. So according to Texas Education Code, we have to consider self-defense, intent, disciplinary history, a disability that substantially impairs the student's capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of the conduct, and the student's status as homeless or in the conservatorship of foster care. So all of those factors have to be taken into consideration, but no one can really know that what's going on with that kid because of FERPA. So we take all of these things into consideration, but another parent, maybe a victim, may not know.
So we have a behavior matrix, but we also need to take all of these things into consideration. So what you're saying with A plus B does not always equal C. It can vary child to child.
Right. So let's say you have a mandatory placement. Mandatory doesn't always mean mandatory once we take all of these things into consideration, which we must take into consideration by law.
So we've covered alternative learning environments in mandatory versus discretionary placements. What are we missing in the continuum?
I think the only thing we didn't talk about that seems to be a myth out there is that when a student is expelled and they're sent to our juvenile justice alternative education program, and that's the one in McKinney, when a student's expelled, they do come back. And it just seems that when we hear expelled, we think they're gone for good, but they do come back. And a lot of times that's upsetting to parents to see.
I'm immediately thinking of Hermione, and she's like, or worse, expelled. Okay, so when you're expelled, or a student's expelled, they can come back. So it's not like the mental image that someone might have, like that student's never coming back, because we have the responsibility of educating students within our boundaries.
Absolutely. So if they're sent to our Student Opportunity Center, which is our DAEP, our Disciplinary Alternative Education Program, it's for an amount of time and they come back. And then it's the same thing when they're expelled to JJAEP. It's for an amount of time and they come back.
And what would you say to a parent who says Frisco ISD schools aren't tough enough on conduct?
Well, we hear that. We hear we're not tough enough, and then we'll hear we're too tough. And so really, I think what's most important to know is that our goal is to be as equitable as possible. And our ultimate goal is to change a student's behavior. So the district uses a process called multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS. You might hear that as it applies to academics or behavior. So when a student's exhibiting difficulties, we analyze and determine what can be put in place to support the student and the student's individual needs. However, when they violate the student code of conduct, consequences will be assigned.
And what resources are available to parents to help them understand the student code of conduct?
The FISD website is really a great place to start. On the Student Services page, we have more information about behavior, about our Student Opportunity Center, which is our local alternative placement, as well as the whole child. You can also find more information out about the MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support, on our website too.
Okay, so when it comes to student discipline, there's so many things that can be done on a classroom, on a campus, but the more official things might be in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, SOC, DAEP, JJAEP. There's a long list of potential consequences for students depending on exactly what the infraction is.
That's correct.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. Luckily, parents have a lot of resources online where they can access all of this stuff. So friscoisd.org on the Student Services page is where they should go?
That's correct.
Fantastic. Erin, thank you so much for your time. We all really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Stick around for news updates from around the district.
Here's a look at news from around the district. The third special session of the year has commenced as Governor Greg Abbott seeks legislative support to finance education savings accounts that can be used at private schools. For the latest updates on this special session, be sure to follow at FISD Gov Affairs on Facebook, Instagram, and X to stay informed about its potential impact on Frisco ISD. Frisco ISD recently earned an A rating for its financial management, indicating strong fiscal responsibility. The rating reflects the district's sound financial practices and efficient resource allocation. The achievement highlights Frisco ISD's commitment to managing its finances effectively. And lastly, we sincerely thank everyone, or all 13,000 of you who participated